Moderate. You're live.
Продовжуємо роботу в українському.
We continue working at the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, and the topic of our next event is how Ukraine uses international aid in defense. A representation of research. Our guest is Timothy Evans, member of the National Defense Anti-Corruption Committee, Colonel General of the British Army, former commander of the Allied Rapid Reaction Corps, of the National Defense Anti-Corruption Committee. Also, Sevgil Musayeva, member of the National Defense Anti-Corruption Committee, chief editor of internet publication Ukrainska Pravda, and Artem Davydenko, analyst at the National Defense Anti-Corruption Committee, co-author of the research. The first floor will be given to Sevgil Musayeva. Good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the interest shown to the topic of the national security. It seems to me that this is one of the largest topics since the beginning of the military aggression in Donbass. On behalf of Russia, now we want to present you the results of the research. We have been working quite for a long time. This is a full, interesting research in this aspect. Maybe it should have been done earlier. But first of all, I'd like to present to you the project NACO. It's an anti-corruption committee finding. It's Transparency International Defense Security, British, UK findings as well. And it consists of 6 members, 3 of them from the foreign side, 3 of them from the Ukrainian side. You will be able, after the press conference, you will be able to come over to the important experts mentioned, and if you have any questions, then they will have a pleasure to answer them. As to the research, of course, since the beginning of the military conflict in Donbass, we were all interested in the topic of what was happening and is happening in the front line, and since the beginning of the military conflict, Ukraine started to attract international assistance and technical assistance from its partners. Why? To increase the defensibility of our country and to build a dialogue, and as to how many countries have attracted this. First of this assistance, from how many countries we have attracted this assistance? It's 17 countries. The largest donor is the USA. In 2016, the USA provided technical assistance in the amount of $685 million. This is it makes 7% of the overall military budget of Ukraine. So you can imagine how large this figure is. Of course, not only the donors are worried are concerned of how this assistance is being used, but also it is a concern of common citizens and also people defending the country in the east. And they are interested whether this assistance achieves the front line and how effectively it is being used there, and what should be done to improve the use of these funds. These questions these questions made the basis of this research, and you can find answers in this booklet. This is a titanic work. You ought to read it, and I'm very pleased that this is the first issue of how a real research should look in the area of international assistance in the defense sector. About conclusions we made, I will make such a small conclusion, and then my colleagues will tell you in detail what this research is about. First of all, we were surprised. Yesterday I talked to Artem. Of course, there's a great progress as compared to 2014, 2015 as to the use of this assistance. That is, Ukraine is learning from its mistakes and is learning good lessons. Then the most important problem is not even corruption risks, though it seemed to us that it was evident, but an efficiency of management of what is called mismanagement, and Artem will make comments of what it is about. And thirdly, we developed our recommendations. Of course, what we are displeased about, this is excessive secrecy in the defense area, and Tim Evans will give you deeper recommendations in this area. Those are very interesting recommendations that have to be promoted and fulfilled to make more efficient international assistance in the defense sector. Now the floor is given to Artem. He will tell you in detail about this research. This research was started in winter 2016. From the very beginning, we set two issues in front of us. Those are shortcomings in the attraction of the technical assistance from international partners, and how the system can be improved to attract larger assistance to meet our needs better. First of all, we addressed the theoretical foundation. We learned the legislation and formal processes. Of course, that wasn't enough. That's why we decided to talk with representatives of donor countries who are more or less involved into this process. First of all, we addressed, and of course we talked to the UK and the US representatives, because they are, together with Canada, are the largest donors in the area of the defense area of Ukraine. And we were surprised that the donor representatives were rather open during the communication and shared their recommendations, and they told us about the shortcomings in this area and the progress appearing during the last few years. Largely based on the information received from them, we formed the recommendations contained in this report. Of course, only to talk to the donors wouldn't have been enough. That's why we decided to talk to the military. Those are operational servicemen who are directly involved into receiving the international assistance. Also, we talk about tactical servicemen who are direct participants or recipients of this assistance. Vitaly Denega, the leader of the fund Come Back Alive, helped us to make an interview with servicemen who directly use this assistance. Also, we talked to the volunteers and the officers of the military services self-enforcement forces, and it helped us to create a rather large picture of what is happening and to understand practical dimensions of these processes. Also, we succeeded in communicating with an ex-commander of the battalion. It was very important for us not to talk only with the servicemen who went in the front line, but went at the back area, but who also had experience of the ATO service. Servicemen are more open to the communication, but finally, we succeeded in getting information from them about the shortcomings, about their opinion, how the system could be improved, and how effectively the provided assistance was being used. Generally, we made about 15 interviews with the donor representatives, about 12 interviews with the servicemen, and approximately with 4 volunteers. Finally, we received quite a lot of information that we analyzed, and based on this information, we developed relevant recommendations about which Mr. Emmons will tell you.
And with some major recommendations.
Як ви щойно почули, то це дуже обширний, великий репорт.
And what's important is we looked at the strategic at the top level all the way down to the front line.
Що найголовніше, що ми маємо дивитися на цей звіт по всій вертикалі, з стратегічних напрямків і до самого безпосереднього кінцевого використання цієї допомоги.
And what is crucial for the defense of Ukraine is to make sure you've got a comprehensive strategic plan.
Що найважливіше для захисту України, що ми маємо отримати повний стратегічний план.
That must give you clear priorities for the defense of Ukraine, which is then translated into capabilities and then equipment.
Спочатку ми маємо отримати чіткі пріоритети з приводу
Priorities capability, and then equipment.
Спершу це пріоритет, далі які в нас спроможності і
Capability is how you do something.
Да. Друге це спроможність, and the third was?
Is equipment.
І третє це безпосередньо використання обладнання, так.
But what we noticed is that we need greater transparency in the strategic defense order and the priorities directions.
Що ми помітили, що нам потрібно прозорість в
In the strategic defense order
в порядку стратегічного захисту
and the priority directions.
і в напрямках пріоритетних напрямках.
Now that might require the amendment of the law of secrets.
Скоріше за все, це має стосуватися зміни або поправок до законодавства.
And obviously there could be concern that you're at war at the moment.
І також ви маєте пам'ятати, що ви знаходитесь в стані війни зараз.
But I would say this takes time. You need your safeguards, but you can't hide behind the veil of secrecy because you've got to open up to understand truly what is going on in the requirements for the country.
Але найголовніше, що це має означати для вас, що ви не маєте приховуватись за якоюсь пеленою секретності і маєте розуміти, усвідомлювати, що стан речей є таким загрозливим.
And we understand that parts of it will have to remain secret.
Але ми також розуміємо, що частина такої інформації має залишатися в секреті.
But by doing so, you increase the donor trust.
І якщо крокувати такими шляхами, то ви підвищуєте довіру в плані донорів країн.
And you can see whether the requirements, what the requirements are, and whether there's an analysis of what and why you need these requirements.
І ви також розумієте, які є вимоги і як ми маємо аналізувати ці вимоги.
But we'd also recommend that you need a new framework to look at security assistance.
Ми також рекомендуємо вам, можливо, змінити рамки, крізь які ви дивитесь на зовнішню допомогу.
Because we know that international technical assistance comes in one area in the MEDT.
NADT.
Ministry of Aid.
Yeah, Minister.
So the international technical assistance.
From the very beginning, I missed the beginning. So.
Yeah. So we know that there is different ways that security assistance comes into the country.
Ми також розуміємо, що допомога приходить з різних боків до України.
Through international technical assistance.
З технічної допомоги.
Humanitarian aid.
А також гуманітарна допомога.
Through charities.
А також залучення добровільних пожертвувань.
And through bilaterals through countries.
А також двосторонні відносини між країнами.
And we think they should now come under the MOD.
І ми також
coordinated through the MOD.
І також має проводитися кооперація разом з Міністерством оборони.
But held over the National Security Defence Council.
РНБО.
Okay.
РНБО.
And therefore, within the MOD, the Ministry of Defence, you need a new capabilities department to get better oversight.
Я перепрошую. Just one.
Do you want to do it?
Yeah, one thing. If it is possible, could you please try not to use acronyms because
Okay.
I'm not really comfortable with these so far.
Okay.
Just one thing.
So a new department
Yeah.
to understand what the assistance is, making sure that it has got a good oversight, so people understand.
І також новий підрозділ має чітко розуміти, що вони чітко бачать процес цієї допомоги.
And therefore, at the strategic level, you've got better direction and oversight, which will help the security assistance back to your army.
А на стратегічному рівні можна чітко бачити, як ця допомога надходить зрештою до армії.
And therefore, also, you need greater transparency in budgeting.
А також ви маєте розуміти, що більше прозорості має відбуватися в плані фінансування,
Procurement,
закупівель,
and the role of defence state industries,
і також ролью Укроборонпрому, так?
And therefore, we think you should adopt NATO standards for procurement.
І також ми розуміємо, що вам варто долучитися і наблизитися до стандартів НАТО в плані закупівель.
Ukроборонпrom should do OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
збудувати і поглиблювати відношення з організацією
Once again.
з організацією економічного співробітництва та розвитку,
which will help with corporate governance,
що допоможе корпоративному керуванню, управлінню.
and that you need a proper supervisory body
І вам також потрібен належного рівня орган, який буде здійснювати керування. Наглядова рада.
of which we know that there are 2 members at the moment, but the government now needs to appoint 3 independent advisors.
На сьогодні зараз існує 2 керівника-представника, але ми також знаємо, що має
Another 3 or total 3?
Another 3, so you've got 2, so it's 5
і
in total.
також ще має бути призначені ще 3 до цієї ради.
And NARCO is available to help with the criteria, how you form this committee and how it should run.
І НАТО збирається допомогти з приводу того, які критерії мають використовуватися до відбору цих особистостей і призначення на посаду.
And as Artem mentioned, what we also got to make sure is that the request that you ask the frontline commanders, what do they need?
І також, як Артем наголосив трошки спочатку, що ми маємо запитати у керівників підрозділів на фронті, що безпосередньо їм потрібно.
And then when the equipment comes in, you must track it with the latest systems using software.
І потім, коли обладнання приходить на передній край, ви маєте отримати певне програмне забезпечення, яке має контролювати і відстежувати обладнання.
And this helps with distribution, inventory planning, and making sure the equipment gets to the soldiers on the front line.
І це забезпечує розподіл обладнання, відстежування і те, як його на передньому краї отримують безпосередньо бійці.
And we also noticed that some of the equipment didn't have maintenance contracts.
Ми також помітили, що деякі обладнання не мають контракту на обслуговування, так?
Spare parts
Також запчастини,
and accessories which the frontline soldiers need.
а також додаткове обладнання, які офіцери потребують.
We also noted that some of the training wasn't being given to the soldiers who had the equipment.
Ми також помітили, що навчання або тренінг персоналу не відбувався, коли взагалі це обладнання надавалося в допомогу.
And also that some of the qualifications those soldiers might have got from courses abroad weren't recognized in Ukraine.
А також, можливо, певні навчання і вміння деяких солдатів, можливо, надходили десь з-за кордону.
So qualifications that are gained abroad weren't recognized here in Ukraine.
І певні рівні, які вони здобули, можливо, були отримані за кордоном, а не в Україні.
And these need things to change to make sure that, again, you get your best defense for Ukraine.
І також ці речі мають бути зміненими для того, щоб переконатися, що обороноздатність України знаходиться на високому рівні.
But I also think the donors can be more transparent about what aid and assistance they're giving.
А також донори мають бути більш прозорими з приводу того, яку допомогу вони надають.
But they're also possible to give pressure to ensure that these reforms and recommendations are taken forward.
Right. Також ми маємо переконатися, що можливо також долучити ще більший тиск, аби ця допомога була дієвою.
Because you need to have that pressure because it's difficult. And some of these recommendations will take time.
І саме через те, що є певні складнення, тому, можливо, варто використовувати якийсь додатковий тиск, бо будь-які зміни, вони потребують часу.
But it's really important if you want a professional army that is capable of defending Ukraine.
Але це важливо, якщо ви збираєтесь збудувати обороноздатну армію в Україні.
And from our recommendations, this is from the strategic right the way down to the tactical.
І з моєї перспективи я б вам порадив починати з самого початку, тобто з стратегії, і до самого нижчого рівня, до тактичного навчання.
And so you can understand a lot of it is transparency of information.
І багато в чому ви маєте розуміти, що в корні проблеми – це прозорість інформації.
Which is a change of culture and an education.
Що, можливо, означатиме зміну культури і освіти.
And all of our armies have gone through it, UK particularly.
І всі наші армії вже пройшли крізь це, і, зокрема, армія Великої Британії.
So I would ask you to read the report because I do think there are some very good recommendations that will help your army.
І я вам рекомендую прочитати цей звіт, бо в ньому є дуже слушні і якісної ваги рекомендації до вашої армії.
Thank you.
Дякую вам.
Дякую вам за презентацію, колеги журналісти. Якщо
Thank you for the presentations, dear colleagues. If you have questions to the speakers, please introduce yourselves. Чи є у вас будь-які запитання до журналістів? You reply, Ukrainian Week, good morning. You are talking about the state defense order and about the transparent access to this information to the donors and to the public. I agree that excessive secrecy prevents people from effective work against corruption, but we understand that the state defense order is not being formed at the Ministry of Defense. Yes, it is being formed there, but the Ministry of Economic Development is responsible for it. And in principle, I haven't heard from you how you communicated with that very ministry. This is the first part of the question, and also, do you plan any cooperation with this ministry? And the second question is, what are your next practical efforts? Last time, at this presentation, you said that you were going to make a report and to analyze the problems, and I understand that you have made this report and you are presenting what will come next. Thank you.
You spoke with the Ministry of Development just 2 days ago.
Ministry of... Окей. Нещодавно ми спілкувалися з міністром Кобів.
And went through our recommendations.
І ми переглянули наші рекомендації.
And I said that we would now follow up with further meetings to help them through and understand truly what we are saying.
Ми організували наступну зустріч, яка буде підтверджувати або фіналізувати наші попередні комунікації.
And what steps they need to make to try and put these recommendations into place.
І які наступні кроки вони мають долучити, щоб до практики долучити предмет нашої розмови.
We've also met with the Minister of Defence.
Ми також зустрілися з міністром оборони,
who is again willing to talk now through in detail of the recommendations.
Який зараз хоче поговорити в деталях з приводу цих рекомендацій.
And as you can imagine, he was concerned about war, the country being at war, and obviously about how much you open up on your strategic defence order and the priority directions.
Could you repeat it once?
Yeah, who is concerned about the obviously being at war, as how much transparent you can be.
Да, і також який зараз відчуває гострість питання, яке заключається в тому, що з одного боку Україна зараз знаходиться в стані війни. Ukraine is at war, and the second is...
Yes, so therefore, how much can you be transparent?
І звісно, відповідно з цього, наскільки Україна має бути відкрита і прозора.
But we understand that this is a staged approach. It takes time.
І ми розуміємо, що це поступовий розвиток, і на це піде час.
And that you must therefore have some secrets, but the other areas where you don't need to be secret, open up, because that will help the way understanding of what your defense needs are.
Тому з одного боку ми дійсно розуміємо, що певний рівень секретності має залишатися, але треба бути достатньо прозорим, аби забезпечити ефективну комунікацію.
But you raised a very good point that it should be the Ministry of Defence who has the strategic plan to understand its needs for defence.
Але ви поставили дуже слушне і правильне питання, що саме міністр оборони має розуміти, яка має бути оборона.
And they should have the policy that then gives direction down to the state industries as to what Ukraine requires.
UK?
Ukraine. So they should have the policy that states what Ukraine needs.
І також в міністерстві має бути політика, яка стверджує, що потребує, в чому...
What are the needs of Ukraine?
Telling Ukraine what it needs.
Sorry, I missed the beginning.
Yeah, so it can't be the state industry that tells the defense what it needs.
І також це не має бути якась індустрія або промисловість, яка диктує, що потрібно Україні.
And therefore, for next steps, we'll be looking at procurement and trying to understand how can we help Ukraine make sure that they have the procurement steps in place to enact a stronger an army.
І вже потім йде наступний крок, які мають бути закупівлі в Україні для того, аби зробити армію більш обороноздатною.
Також я
Also, I would like to add that we have handed our recommendations as to this report over to the administration of the President of Ukraine, and they will also give you their feedback, ask you their feedback, and will inform you if they have practical steps. Dear colleagues, do you have any other questions? If there are no more questions, then a small question is coming from me. Those who didn't come, who couldn't come today's conference, where can they find information as to today's meeting? What's this website they could use? There's an official website of the Anti-Corruption Committee of the Committee for Defense Issues. There you can find English and Ukrainian version, and also at the official website of our committee you can find such text, and also a little comment on how cooperation of this, of the coordination of the assistance and the capability and the strategy of the defense forces. And it happens that the strategy is quite formal, and it has few specificities to make a sound foundation for priorities in this area of donor assistance. Why do you have these problems? What are the roots of them? What's the problem of why the strategy? Well, I will reform. There's the strategy, but at the same time the report says that Ukraine lacks a strategic understanding of what they need to have donors provide the very assistance Ukraine will need.
Now 15 to 20 years.
In future, right?
Yeah, looking into the future.
Перспектива погляду з приводу цього стану речей – це приблизний горизонт 15-20 років наперед.
And look with analysts as to what do we think the future battlefield might look like, or the future operating it.
Тому ми ставимо питання, і аналітики ставлять питання, якими потенційно можуть бути поля бою в перспективі.
And what do we think the threats might be for Ukraine?
І які потенційні загрози можуть бути для України.
And then you work back to your current programs.
І потім, відповідно з цього, ми робимо кроки назад до теперішнього часу.
To see what you've got now and what you think you might require in the future.
Для того, щоб побачити, що в нас є зараз і що нам має бути потрібно в майбутньому.
And as you can imagine, that's difficult because no one can predict the future, but by doing so, you allow yourselves to be thinking about points, stepping stones that you will then go through.
Кожен розуміє, що передбачати майбутнє – це дуже важка праця, але ми маємо вмощувати нашу дорожку певними містками, по яких можна крокувати і передбачати майбутнє з більшою вірогідністю.
And this then helps you build a policy on what you think your defensive needs are.
І це допоможе збудувати ту політику, якою має бути безпека.
You can then see what you have, if there are any gaps or any missing capabilities. See, then you can understand if there's, from your analysis, if there are anything missing your capabilities or equipment.
І також цей аналіз може показати, що безпосередньо, в чому є безпосередня потреба України на даний час для аналізу.
And that's when you can then give your orders to your state industry to start producing the equipment you need for the future.
І відповідно з того вже можна потім надавати накази або державні замовлення для виробників, щоб замовляти саме те, що може бути необхідним в майбутньому.
And then also you can go outside to the international countries to see whether and what they can do to help.
А також можна виходити вже за межі України і спілкуватися з іноземними компаніями, виробниками, комунікаторами з приводу того, що нам має бути або може бути потрібно в майбутньому.
But of course those countries need to understand the context of where you are heading for the future.
Але для цього треба розуміти той контекст, в якому зараз знаходиться Україна, з огляду на майбутнє.
So 2020 is a good first step, but now looking out to the future, it will be the next.
2020 рік – це дуже близький горизонт, це прекрасно, що ми його бачимо, але треба ще бачити і за межами 2020 року.
Thank you.
Дякую.
Thank you for the presentation. Please tell me whether you have any new questions, if there are no more questions, and thanks a lot to you, and I hope that this research will make a good foundation to improve the situation in this area. See you next time.